Welcome to the deep dive. In this digital age, understanding how organizations protect their information, well, it's not just for the tech experts anymore.
Absolutely not.
Whether you're prepping for a meeting, trying to understand company policy, or maybe you're just curious about how security works, knowing the basics is really essential.
It really is.
So today, we're going to break down the very first few clauses of ISO IEC 27005.2022. Think of it as the foundation for managing information security risks.
Exactly. And our mission here really is to make clauses 1 through 5 crystal clear. You provided this document, ISO 27005, so we're tailoring this to help you navigate it.
We want to cut through the jargon, get to the core concept.
Keep it practical and insightful. It's the bedrock, like you said.
Right. So consider us your guides for this part. Let's jump right in with Clause 1 scope.
Okay, Clause 1. Like any good standard, it starts by telling you what it's all about.
What it covers, yeah.
It says basically that this document, 27005, gives guidance on meeting the risk requirements laid out in ISO IE 27001. Okay, so 27001 says what you need to do about risk, and 27001-5 gives you the how-to.
That's a great way to put it. It provides the practical steps for fulfilling those 27001 requirements concerning risk.
Makes sense. What else does the scope tell us?
Well, it specifically guides organizations on doing the actual risk management activities, and it zeroes in on two main things. Risk assessment.
Figuring out what could go wrong.
Yep. And risk treatment.
Deciding what to do about it.
Exactly. It's about identifying those potential problems and then acting on them. Sometimes organizations, they don't scope this broadly enough initially.
Right, leaving gaps.
Yeah.
So assessment and treatment. Pretty fundamental. Who is this guidance actually for? Just big companies?
No, not at all. And that's a really crucial point in Clause 1. It explicitly states this guidance applies to all organizations.
All of them.
Doesn't matter the type, the size, or the sector. Small business, huge corporation, government agency, nonprofit. It's relevant.
That really underscores that information security isn't optional, is it? It's for everyone. It's fundamental today. Everyone handles information that needs protecting.
Okay, good point. Let's move to Clause 2. Normative references. Sounds a bit formal.
It does sound a bit dry, maybe, but it's important. Think of these as required reading, essential companions.
Okay.
Clause 2 lists other documents that ISO 27005 directly refers to and relies on. When it makes a normative reference, the content it points to in that other document becomes essentially part of the requirements of 27005.
So you can't fully understand 27005 without also considering these reference documents. They're integral.
Precisely. They're not just further reading, they're incorporated.
Is there a main one we should know about?
Yes, the big one is ISO IEC 27000. The full title is quite a mouthful. Information Technology Security Techniques, Information Security Management Systems, Overview and Vocabulary.
Vocabulary. That sounds key.
It is. 27000 provides the official definitions for all the terms used across the ISO 27000 family, including 27005. It's the shared dictionary, you could say.
Makes perfect sense. You need common language, especially in a technical field like this. So if 27005 uses a term, we look to 27000 for the official meaning.
Exactly right. It ensures consistency.
Which leads us nicely into Clause 3, terms and definitions.
The vocabulary section. Building right on Clause 2, this is absolutely vital for making sure we all mean the same thing when we use these terms.
So Clause 3 relies on the definitions from 27000, as we just said. But does it introduce its own specific terms too?
Yes, it does. It refines or adds terms specifically relevant to information security risk management. It's split into two main parts. 3.1 for terms about the risk itself, and 3.2 for terms about managing that risk.
Okay, let's tackle 3.1 first. What's a key concept there?
A really fundamental one is external context. 3.1.1. This is everything outside the organization that can affect its security.
The wider world.
Exactly. The environment it operates in. Think social, political, legal factors, regulatory demands, financial markets, technology trends, economic conditions, even things like geography.
Wow, that's broad.
It is. And it also includes key trends, what external parties expect or need, contracts you have, how complex your network of partners is. It's the whole external picture. Organizations sometimes don't pay enough attention here.
Okay, that's the outside view. Logically, there must be an internal context. 3.1.22.
Spot on. Internal context is everything inside the organization. Its vision, mission, values, how it's governed, its structure, strategy, objectives, policies.
So the formal stuff.
Yes, but also the informal. Organizational culture is huge. Adopted standards, capabilities like resources and knowledge data, systems, information flows, internal stakeholders, dependencies between departments.
Right, the tangible and intangible things within the company walls. So understanding this context, internal and external, helps us understand risk 3.1.3 itself. How's that defined?
This is central. Risk is defined as the effect of uncertainty on objectives.
Uncertainty, like not knowing what might happen.
Exactly. A lack of complete information about an event, its consequences, or how likely it is. And notice it says effect. That can technically be positive or negative.
But in information security, we're usually worried about the negative effects, right?
Usually, yes. The definition notes that in our field, risk is often about the negative effect of uncertainty on information security objectives. It often comes from threats, exploiting vulnerabilities.
Threats and vulnerabilities, we'll get to those. So risk is about potential deviation from our security goals due to uncertainty. How does a risk scenario, 3.1.4, fit in?
A risk scenario helps make risk concrete. It's described as a sequence of events going from some starting cause to an unwanted result.
Like a story of how things could go wrong.
Pretty much. Like, attacker sends phishing email, cause, employee clicks link, event 1, malware installs event 2, data gets stolen, unwanted consequence. It maps it out.
That clarifies it. Now, who's responsible for dealing with a specific risk? That's the risk owner, 3.1.5.
Correct. The risk owner is the person or entity accountable and authorized to manage a risk. Keywords: accountable and authorized. They need the power to act. Finding the right owner can be tricky sometimes.
I can imagine. And where do these risks actually come from? What's a risk source? 3.1.6.
A risk source is anything that can potentially cause risk. The standard groups them into 3 types. Human.
People making mistakes or doing bad things.
Both intentional or unintentional. Then environmental.
Like floods, fires.
Natural disasters, power outages, things like that. And finally, technical sources.
System failures. Software bugs.
Exactly. Hardware, software, network issues. Recognizing these sources helps find risks.
Okay, so we have risks, owners, sources. How do we decide if a risk is a big deal or not? Risk criteria, 3.1.7.
Precisely. Risk criteria are the benchmarks used to evaluate the significance of a risk. How bad is bad? How likely is likely?
Where do these benchmarks come from?
They're based on the organization's objectives, its context, internal and external, and importantly, its risk appetite. They can also come from laws, standards, policies. They give you the measuring stick. Defining clear criteria is often a challenge.
And you mentioned risk appetite, 3.1.8. What's that exactly?
Risk appetite is the amount and type of risk an organization is willing to pursue, retain, or take.
So how much pain are you willing to potentially endure to achieve your goals?
That's a good way to think about it, yeah. It's a strategic decision. A tech startup might have a higher appetite for certain risks than, say, a bank.
Makes sense. Okay, now for the things we defend against. A threat, 3.1.9.
A threat is a potential cause of an unwanted incident which could result in harm to systems or the organization. It's the potential danger.
Like a hacker or malware or even an accident.
Right. And a threat exploits a vulnerability. 3.1.0.
A weakness.
Exactly. A weakness of an asset or control that can be exploited by a threat. Unpatched software, a weak password, an unlocked door. Those are vulnerabilities.
And if a threat exploits a vulnerability, that can lead to an event. 3.1.1.
Yes, an event is just an occurrence or change of circumstances. In our context, usually an unwanted one, like a security breach.
Okay. Now, we skipped a few terms there dealing with likelihood and consequences, but let's jump to what we do about vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Control, 3.1.16.
Good idea. A control is a measure that maintains and or modifies risk. It's what you put in place to prevent bad things or lessen their impact.
Like firewalls, policies, training.
Exactly. Processes, policies, devices, practices, anything that helps manage the risk.
And even with controls, some risk might still be left. That's residual risk, 3.1.172.
Correct. Residual risk is the risk remaining after risk treatment. You almost never get to zero risk, so understanding and managing what's left is key.
Okay, that covers the key terms in 3.1 about risk itself. What about section 3.2? Terms related to managing the risk. Starts with the risk management process, 3.2.1.
Right. This is defined as the systematic application of management policies, procedures, and practices to all the risk activities. Communicating, consulting, setting context, identifying, analyzing, evaluating, treating, monitoring, and reviewing risk.
So it's the whole structured approach, the continuous cycle.
Continuous and iterative, definitely not a one-off thing. And a big part of that cycle is risk communication and consultation, 3.2.2.
Keeping people informed and involved.
Exactly. Ongoing processes to share info and have dialogue with stakeholders about risk management. It fosters buy-in and better decisions.
Then we get into the core steps. First, risk identification, 3.2.4.
Simply the process of finding, recognizing, and describing risks. Can't manage what you don't know exists.
Makes sense. Find the risks first, then risk analysis, 3.2.5.
That's the process of comprehending the nature of risk and determining the level of risk. Basically, understanding how likely it is and what the impact could be.
Getting the details, figuring out the potential severity, which leads to risk evaluation, 3.2.6.
Right. This is where you compare the results of your analysis against your risk criteria.
The benchmarks we talked about earlier.
Exactly. To decide if the risk is acceptable or if it needs treatment, it helps prioritize.
And if it needs treatment, that brings us to risk treatment, 3.2.7.
Yep. The process to modify risk. Selecting and implementing options like avoiding the risk, changing its likelihood or consequences, retaining it, or sharing it.
Sharing like insurance or outsourcing.
Those are common examples of risk sharing. One important note. For information security, deliberately increasing risk for an opportunity isn't usually considered a treatment option, unlike in some other risk fields.
Okay, so treatment is about actively trying to reduce unacceptable risks. But sometimes we might just decide to live with a risk. Risk acceptance, 3.2.8.
That's right. Risk acceptance is an informed decision to take a particular risk. Maybe treatment is too expensive or the risk is already within your appetite, but it must be a conscious, documented decision.
Not just ignoring it.
Definitely not. And finally, risk sharing, 3.2.9, which we touched on.
Distributing the risk.
Yeah, a form of risk treatment involving agreed distribution of risk with other parties. Insurance, contractual agreements with suppliers, specifying responsibilities, that sort of thing.
Wow. Okay, Clause 3 is dense, but incredibly important. Getting that terminology right is foundational.
Absolutely crucial for clear communication and effective implementation.
Right. So let's move on. Clause 4, structure of this document. This should be quicker. A roadmap.
Exactly. Clause 4 just outlines how the rest of the standard is laid out. It lists the main clauses coming up. Clause 5 on the overall process, 6 on context, 7 on assessment, 8 on treatment, 9 on operation, and 10 on leveraging related ISMS processes.
So it shows the logical flow, high level down to specifics and integration. Does it mention anything else about structure?
Yes, it points out that clauses 7 through 10, where they describe specific activities, follow a consistent pattern.
Oh, like a template.
Sort of. They generally use input, action, trigger, output, and guidance sections for each activity. Makes it easier to follow and apply the recommendations consistently.
That sounds very practical. Okay, then let's look at Clause 5, Information Security Risk Management. This sounds like it ties things together.
It does. It gives the big picture overview of the whole risk management process described in 27005. And importantly, it states this process is based on ISO 31000.
Which is the general overarching standard for risk management, not just for IT security.
Correct. So it aligns information security risk management with broader established best practices. It's not happening in a vacuum.
Good to know it connects to wider principles. Clause 5 also mentions Figure 1, illustrating the process.
Yes, and a key thing that figure and the text emphasize is that risk assessment and risk treatment are iterative.
Meaning you don't just do them once.
Exactly. Your first risk assessment might be high level. You might need to go back, refine it, maybe change the scope, bring in different experts as you learn more. It's a cycle.
So assessment isn't a single step, but potentially many loops. What about treatment? Same idea.
Absolutely. You formulate treatments, implement them, check if they worked. Did they reduce the risk enough? Is the leftover residual risk okay?
And if it's not okay?
Then you might need more treatment or different treatment, or you might even loop back to reassess the risk again now that controls have changed. It's a constant feedback loop.
Learn and adapt. Got it.
Yeah.
Clause 5 also mentions different cycles of risk management.
Yeah, it briefly distinguishes between a strategic cycle and an operational cycle.
Strategic sounds like big picture changes.
Right. Triggered by major shifts in business strategy, the threat landscape, organizational structure. things that require a higher level rethink of risks.
And operational.
More the day-to-day management of risks within the current context. In reality, you might have multiple assessments going on, feeding into both cycles.
So you're managing risk constantly, both responding to big changes and handling the ongoing stuff, and Clause 5 points us forward for the details.
Precisely. It wraps up by saying Clause 6 covers context, 7 assessment, 8 treatment, and 10 the supporting activities. It sets the stage for the deep dives into those processes.
Okay, well, that brings us through the first 5 clauses of ISO/IEC 27R 5.2022, scope, references, the crucial definitions, the structure, and the overall process overview. It really feels like we've laid some solid groundwork here.
Definitely. Grasping these initial clauses is absolutely essential. They give you the framework, the language, the context to understand everything that follows. Without this foundation, the later parts on assessment and treatment can seem, well, pretty overwhelming.
So for you listening, as you work with 27005, maybe take a moment to think about these basics in your own context. How does your organization view its external context? Is your risk appetite clearly defined? What are your key threats and vulnerabilities?
Yeah, asking those questions grounded in these first clauses is a great starting point. It brings a standard to life.
And of course, if you have questions about any of this or want to explore something in more detail, just let us know. We're here to help you unpack it.
Absolutely. We can always dive deeper.